United as rarely before, the West has fired off one salvo of economic sanctions after another in response to Vladimir Putin's attack on Ukraine, sending the ruble plummeting and citizens rushing to withdraw their savings from Russian banks. So far, that has prompted no let-up in the fighting. Now, the United States are upping the pressure, banning oil imports from Russia. Calls for Europe to follow suit are growing louder, but countries like Germany fear that could harm citizens and industry. Yet that pain could pale compared to the looming food crisis caused by the shortage of wheat from Ukraine. On To the Point, we ask, sanctions against Putin, could they cripple the global economy? Pleasure to welcome our guests. Katja Gloger is an expert on Eastern Europe and former Moscow and Washington correspondent for the German weekly magazine Der Stern. And it's a pleasure to have with us Vendeline van Bredow. She is the European business and finance correspondent for the British magazine The Economist, based here in Berlin. And I'm very glad that my colleague Vladimir Espinov can join us. Vladimir Esipov, of course. He is with our Russian desk here at DW. Great to have you with us as well. And Vladimir, I'd like to go straight to you to know what you're hearing from friends and relatives in Russia. How much pain are the sanctions causing?
And there's no much pain right in the moment, but there is a very, very big fears about what else can come to Russia, because in the last 2 weeks we saw many achievements of the Russian economy, of the Russian businessmen just collapsing in front of our eyes. So many things which were built up in Russian business, in the Russian economy, just gone in the last 2 weeks. So starting today, the credit cards, MasterCard and Visa, do not work in Russia anymore. McDonald's left, Coca-Cola left. So the people are just irritating and they are trying to cope with this new reality. I've talked yesterday to someone in Moscow who is a friend of mine, a former colleague from my previous job, and she is very afraid in the office where the salary reduction were announced by 20%, and the people are just starting to have some fears about their professional future. Today I spoke to someone in St. Petersburg, in my hometown, who is quite concerned as well. There's no food shortages, there are no panic on the streets, there are no queues in front of the ATMs, but there's a very strong sense of something which can be really worse in the weeks and months to come.
It seems that numerous younger and well-educated Russians are now leaving the country. I actually know of a couple of cases within my own circle of friends. Can you confirm that, and what impact will that have on the country?
As far as I know, the capital of Armenia, Yerevan, is packed with young Russians, professionals and yuppies and journalists arriving from St. Petersburg and Moscow. The flights are full. There's dozens, 20 to 25 flights daily arriving from Russian cities to Armenia alone. I'm hearing stories of people who are trying to get out of Russia via Armenia, Georgia, and then further to Europe. The people are desperate to get a visa for the European Union to flee Russia. It's a huge movement of young, smart, Western-minded people from the country right now.
Mm-hmm. Vendeline, many of us had thought before this war began that Russia had sanction-proofed the economy since 2014. It has seen successive rounds of sanctions since the annexation of the Crimea. And yet, apparently, that sanction-proofing hasn't worked so well. Why?
Well, because the sanctions that are being deployed now are much bigger, stronger, mightier than whatever we did after the annexation of the Crimea. For instance, that we cut off Russia from the SWIFT payment system, which is for international transfers. We didn't do that in the past. The fact that Russia cannot access its foreign currency reserves. They have about $600 billion in foreign reserves, but but they're being frozen. So, that's something we haven't done in the past, the West hasn't done in the past. So what's being unleashed is incomparably bigger than what we did in the past.
And will Vladimir Putin's new friend, Xi Jinping, will he be able to make up for some of this isolation in terms of providing perhaps more trade, an alternative payment system, and so on?
Yes, he will, of course, and he will try to do so. And that's the danger in what the West is doing, right? That we further basically incite Russia to get closer to China. But I think that's a risk worth taking in order to defend Ukraine.
And Katja, as I said when I introduced you, you know Eastern Europe well, you know Russia, and it was clear from your conversation before this show that you also do speak Russian. So also to you, the question about the impact that this is having on normal citizens and whether you think that will make any difference to Vladimir Putin, because autocrats, of course, don't have to really pay attention to public opinion.
Yeah, when it comes to the economical and social situation in Russia, we've seen this since years. What Vladimir is mentioning is happening now to an even larger extent, that young, Western-oriented, innovative, creative people, so all the people you need to modernize a country and to show a way into a good future for a country, that they are leaving. We had tens of thousands of people, scientists, entrepreneurs, creative people leaving Russia already.
But will that make a difference to Vladimir Putin?
Adding to the modernization blockade the country is facing since many years. To Vladimir Putin, it will not make a difference today, but it might make a big difference tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, because the sanctions package, the West united as never, unleashed against the Russian economy and against Putin's oligarchs, will send the economy crippling. I mean, there have been predictions, I think from Morgan Stanley, an American bank, that Russia might default within a couple of months already.
What would that mean, actually? And would Putin feel the effects of that, a default, insolvency?
I mean, if the economy is crashing, it will have huge consequences for the country, for trade and everything. Will it cause political unrest, political demonstrations? Will it cause a revolution, so to say, of the oligarchs turning against him? It's way too early to say. From what I hear, at least from my Russian friends, is that they are, in a situation between total shock and total disbelief, and are very much afraid to go on the street.
Vladimir, let me ask you about those sanctions that target oligarchs. Obviously, the idea is to get to Putin through them. Do you think that will work?
That will not work because oligarchs has no influence on Putin. Oligarchs is a word from the beginning, from the first two terms of Putin's terms as a president in the beginning of 2000 years. Now oligarchs are not a part of the Russian political system. They are not any. They have no any political influence. I saw one of them on British TV a couple of days ago, and he was like fearing for his life and jittering the voice. But there is no chance that the oligarchs can influence the political decisions of Vladimir Putin, not at all.
And it's said that Putin is increasingly in a bubble, that the people closest to him are security elites, and that it's hard to know what information he actually receives. What would he presumably know about the situation of the economy, and how much difference would it make to him, do you think?
Look, we all hear and see the same information from Moscow. We all hear and see that Putin is in a bunker somewhere underground, hiding from the daylight and making some quite strange-looking meetings with his ministers on a very long table. when Putin sitting on the one end of this table and the Minister of the Defense sitting on another end of the table, which looks quite strange. We don't really know which kind of information he gets, on which channels he is being informed. As far as we know, that the channels are very limited, so it's a very limited sources of information what he is getting. But once again, the question is now which pain and which changes the economical crash, and I would talk about the economic crash in Russia because the amount of sanctions and the strength of these sanctions are crashing Russian economy. I would ask myself to which degree is Russian society is ready to adapt to the new reality, and how will this adaptation will go along.
And how's your answer? What's your answer to that question?
I have no answer. As any Russian, we are just speechless since 2 weeks. We're just lacking words. We're just looking into the future, fearing for future, but no one has an answer because no one knows what's next. No one would expect that Russia would invade the neighboring country where so many Russians have friends and relatives, so no one would even dare to make any prognosis for the next week, and I would not do it at all, neither.
Vendeline, a recent editorial by your magazine, The Economist, pointed out that sanctions are a long game and that they inevitably involve trade-offs, saying that we could even see a rollback of globalization from the current dynamic, and that in fact could stop the process that has taken many people all over the world out of poverty. When you look at it that way, would you say that the potential benefits of these harsh sanctions that we're seeing, that they don't necessarily justify the risks?
It's hard to say. These are uncharted waters, right? I mean, we have never unleashed sanctions like that, as Vladimir says. What we did, in 2014-15 is nothing compared to what we are doing now. In particular, now that the US is stopping imports of gas and oil from Russia, as I mentioned, SWIFT, the international payment system. I mean, everything that we announced in the last video, it'll crush the Russian economy. I mean, forecasts are that GDP will go down by 35% this year. In the second quarter, and by 7% for the entire year. That's a lot. That's worse than the financial crisis in 2008. And Vladimir was saying, we don't really feel it yet, but very soon, in particular, the Russian middle class will feel, the effect very, very painfully.
There will not be any middle class left. Sorry to interrupt you. There will be no such Russian middle class left. There will be all, the country will decrease or fall in the poverty on a very huge basis. So I would not talk about any middle class in Russia.
Let us look at the calls now to ratchet up pressure even further. The U.S. this week cut off its oil imports from Russia. Let's hear why.
Today, I'm announcing the United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine. Americans have rallied to support their Ukrainian people and made it clear we will not be part of subsidizing Putin's war.
Katja, calls for Europe to follow suit are, in fact, growing louder. Now, here in Germany, one of the first actions that were taken by the government was to suspend operation of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, bringing Russian gas straight to Germany. But that wasn't in operation yet.
Exactly.
So did that really make any difference?
It was an important political step because it gave the signal that there is a real turn in German policy towards Russia, but with no effect on our, on the deliveries of gas and oil. What we see, though, that the markets react also to President Biden's announcement. So gas prices are skyrocketing. We pay more than €2 per liter of gasoline already. And there certainly is the political fear of social unrest if if prices would soar if we would suspend Nord Stream 1. And this is the discussion we are facing now.
By the way, Putin himself has talked about shutting down shipments through Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 1, of course, being the other pipeline that brings gas to Europe. What likelihood do you think there is that we are going to see a cutoff of gas supply to Europe, either from one side or the other?
It very much depends, I think, on the situation on the ground in Ukraine, how the war is going on and what Putin is ready to do or not to do. The pressure, the political pressure, the moral pressure in the very end will go up if he doesn't stop or if there's no solution to be found. And in the very end, it comes down to the very simple question: we cannot do nothing.
Okay, and we're going to drill deeper on that point. But let me ask Vendeline to tell us a little bit about what these soaring oil prices mean in the way of pain, for example, in the U.S. And I'm talking about political as well as economic pain. The U.S. is a country very dependent on the automobile.
You are right, and in that sense, I admire President Biden for taking that step, because it may hurt him politically. You know, the gas prices are prices for petrol are going up a lot. You know, and that's not popular. I mean, he will try to compensate for it, right? I mean, I know there are talks with the United Arab Emirates, with lots of countries that can increase their production of oil, but you cannot make up for it so quickly. The US gets about 10% of its oil from Russia, so it's substantial, but it's not as much as the European Union, which is about a quarter.
Right. Talk to us about that part of it. Europe is far more dependent on Russian gas than the U.S. is dependent on Russian oil. So what would happen if Europe were to follow the U.S. example?
It's very hard to imagine, because Europe imports 40% of its gas, of its natural gas from Russia, and a quarter, 25% of its oil. To just cut that off from one day to the other, I'm not entirely sure how that could work. Okay, now the coldest months are over, so, you know, maybe over the summer we could find alternative routes, more LNG terminals.
That's what the EU Commission says. It says it has built up now additional reserves, fearing what could happen, and that they will get us through the summer. But
yes, but then there's the winter coming, and the winter might be harsh. I think it is probably possible, but it'll be very hard.
Vladimir, two questions to you, starting with the effect on Russia. So you've told us the effects that the sanctions so far, the impact that you're seeing. What would happen if Europe were now to say, we're cutting off gas?
Look, I think it's just too early to talk about it, because the goal of the sanctions is not to punish Russia as a goal, but to stop this war. And as soon as this war will be stopped, the sanctions should be taken back step by step. So I think we are talking now long term, like end of this year, about possible cut off of the Russian gas and oil deliveries to Europe. But it could be that the war will be stopped much earlier, in the next weeks or months. So the whole topic of the cutting Russian oil and gas deliveries to Europe in the end of this year might be not anymore actual.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. Because you know, of course, Germany, Europe very well. What's your reading of public opinion here? Do you think people here would withstand the hardship that a gas cutoff from European side potentially would cause, meaning cold houses, possibly having to go without other things, comforts?
I'm so busy to digest what the people in the Ukraine just doing and what hardship the people in the Ukraine experiencing right now. There's no cold houses in the Ukraine. The houses are being destroyed. Mm-hmm. There is no discomfort like $2 per gallon gas on benzene and diesel. It's just blown. The tank stations are being on fire. The whole country in the Ukraine is on fire. So I'm just struggling to talk about the hardships in Europe compared to the hardships which Ukrainian people suffering right now.
Then let me tell you.
Back to your question.
Let me ask you. When you say that, Does that mean you think that this back door that the EU left open in its sanctions package, allowing energy deliveries to continue, do you think that should be shut?
What we're seeing right now, that Russia, since the beginning of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, Russia is increasing gas deliveries through the Yamal-Europa pipeline. So the whole issue with the decreasing Russian deliveries in the last months before the special military operation in the Russian wording, now Russia sending more and more gas to Europe. It might be a signal from the Russian government that Russia is ready to deliver more gas to Europe. It's a very interesting signal. It's not being talked much about it, but I'm reading this on the Russian news that Gazprom sending more gas to Europe via this pipeline.
Let me just add, if I might, two very quick points. The first one is German politics and German society, which has shown real solidarity with the Ukrainian people and the fate of the Ukrainian people so far. And former Federal President Joachim Gauck yesterday said it might be worth freezing a little for freedom. So this is a discussion we will face in our country. And then there's, in my eyes, the very important political sign from the European Union, including Germany, to finally get independent of Russian oil, at least oil and gas deliveries, and thereby also showing that the old mantra of, change through trade, Wandel durch Handel in German, that this was fiction in respect to Putin.
I want to take us back to the global situation, because that, of course, was part of the title of our show. And when it comes to hardship, shortages of a very different commodity could spark an even greater global crisis. Ukraine is the world's 5th largest wheat exporter. Planting season is beginning, but many farmers are at war.
In war-torn Yemen, the wheat reserves will last for another couple of months, according to the government. But many, like here in the capital city of Sana'a, worry about the rising prices for flour. The Ukrainian-Russian war will affect the whole world and not just us. This war will affect import, export, and trade because we are an importer of wheat and most of the foodstuffs are from abroad, so undoubtedly we will be affected. Lebanon says it has wheat reserves for just one more month. The country's largest silos were destroyed in an explosion in Beirut in 2020. The country depends on wheat imports, with 60% coming from Ukraine. Turkey depends on wheat imports from Russia. The country is in the midst of an economic crisis with sky-high inflation. There have been massive protests over rising food prices. Many Turks fear that the war will make matters worse, and basic food items even more expensive.
Vendeline, inflation, food shortages, it's all troublingly reminiscent of the 1930s when global economic instability helped pave the way for the Second World War. Could we see a similar collapse of the global economy this time around, or is this time different?
I hope not. I think this time is different. First of all, I'm hoping this will not be a long war. That as Vladimir said, then the sanctions will be rolled back one by one. We will see a spike in the price of wheat. We're already seeing that, and that's a big problem because and there are not many alternatives at the moment to Ukrainian and Russian wheat. But I hope we are not headed for the 1930s again.
And Vladimir, to you, because you told us it's hard to look as far down the road as the end of this year, but you seemed to imply that you see chances for the war to end before that. But none of the peace talks that we're seeing so far are delivering results.
but Russia cannot afford this war to take place like for 1 or 2 months anymore, because Russia in 2 weeks didn't achieve the military goals on the ground. There's a growing sense of fears in the Russian society about the young soldiers who are obviously being either killed in the Ukraine or taken prisoners in the Ukraine. So it's a very urgent sense of emergency in the Russian society, spreading more and more. And for economic situation in Russia will be in 2, 3, 4 weeks or 2 or 3 months on such crisis situation that Russia will be pushed to stop this war somehow.
Katja, our title asks whether sanctions will cripple the global economy. Is there a risk that the war could, in general, could cripple the global economy to the point that it creates more instability rather than less?
I very much hope that financial institutions and political leaders are more up to the task now. I could also hope and imagine when it comes to the economical consequences for a country like China, that China and Putin's new friend and strategic partner Xi Jinping would weigh in.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in. See you soon.